Hey everybody, this week on the Daily Dose, we're talking about how to read the Bible. And today I want to talk to you about what it means when we say gospel. Now, gospel, that's kind of a churchy word. It's not one that we use kind of in everyday life. So the word gospel, it actually means good news. So think about it. If we were to use it in our everyday life, we could be like, gospel, I got that promotion, or gospel, I got straight A's. But as it stands, we tend to only use it when we are talking about the good news of Jesus Christ coming into the world. Now, there are 4 books in the New Testament in the Bible called Gospels or Good News. And these 4 books are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, each of these books, they account for Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And the reason that this is good news is because the life of Jesus is the reconciliation of all things, the reconciliation of all things that actually happened in the Old Testament. You see, in the Old Testament, God started creation there in Genesis chapter 1, and God created people as good. But then people doubted their goodness very, very much, and they started relying on themselves and their own ability instead of God. They started rebelling against God and rebelling against each other. And so God was always faithful, but people, they just kept forgetting God's faithfulness. This is the story of the Old Testament. And so here is why the stories of Jesus are called good news. The good news of the gospel is God's answer to reconciling the world to God through the person of Jesus. And this is why in the Gospels, the writers are constantly referring to all of the things that happened in the Old Testament because they're showing that the person Jesus is the answer to all of those things that is promised about, that's dreamed about, all those things that are hoped for in the Old Testament. Jesus is part of the entire story that starts way back in the beginning of the world. And you are part of the story that's even after Jesus. How super cool is that? How good news is that? So there are 4 Gospels, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're all kind of similar. They're actually called the Synoptic Gospels. Synoptic meaning with one eye. If you can imagine a syn meaning together, and optic, like optometrist, optic meaning eye. That means that these Gospels, they actually had a common perspective on the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they aren't identical, but you can find similarities in each of those 3. But those 3 are quite different from the 4th Gospel, the Gospel of John. Now, the Gospel of John, it kind of goes off in its own direction. It follows a different order than all the other 3 do. The Gospel of John doesn't actually include any parables at all. But all 4 of these Gospels, they were written in their original language, which was Greek. And each of these Gospels were written with a specific audience and purpose in mind. Now, the Gospel of Matthew, it was written around 80 AD, and Matthew specifically speaks to a Jewish audience. All the time in the book of Matthew, he quotes the Old Testament and is often sure to point out to Matthew's readers that Jesus is a fulfillment of all the promises that God made to God's people through the Old Testament. Now, the Gospel of Mark, it's the shortest of all the Gospels, and it's actually the oldest. Mark is the only one who in the book itself calls itself the Gospel or the Good News. So when we use the word Gospel, it actually comes from the book of Mark. And it's likely that both Matthew and Luke used the book of Mark to help write their own Gospels. We can't be certain, but it seems that Mark wrote this gospel for a community of Christians who were within the Roman Empire around the year 70 AD. And one fun fact about the Gospel of Mark is that there seems to be a secret. No one in the book of Mark, as you read it, seems to understand that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the good news for all people, that is, until Jesus dies, and then they all get it. If you read this gospel, it's fun to think of it as a mystery as you uncover it in that way. Now, the Gospel of Luke is actually dedicated in the beginning to a person named Theophilus, which in Greek actually means a friend of God. And maybe this was a specific person, Theophilus, or maybe Luke dedicated it to you, a friend of God. Luke broadens his audience from specifically being for a group of people to include all people. Luke's specific about that this story isn't just for the Jewish people, but it's also for the Gentiles, meaning that it is for all people. And that is kind of a cool thing about the book of Luke. Luke leaves its readers to ponder things regularly, to think about what these stories of Jesus might actually mean. But then there's the outlier, the Gospel of John. It has a totally different feel about who Jesus is. And I'll be honest, the Gospel of John is lovely. John quickly connects Jesus to the very, very beginning of the world, to the creation of the world and all. And it says this in the book of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Meaning that Jesus has been part of the story of humanity. Jesus has been part of the story of creation. Jesus has been part of the earth from its very, very origin. Outside of time and space and history, Jesus, God, is through all of it. In the book of John, it has these clues written for us, written for Jewish Christians too. John has a lot of claims in there. And Jesus proclaims himself as I am statements. Jesus says things in the book of John like, I am the bread of life. I am the resurrection and life. I am the good shepherd. And here's the fun thing. These I am statements in the book of John, it actually echoes back to when Moses in the book of Exodus meets God through a burning bush. Then Moses asks God what God's name is, and God says, I am. That's amazing. Showing us in the book of John that the gospel, that the good news of Jesus Christ is connected to the whole of creation and all of time and all of us. So the Gospels, they're always pointing to the Old Testament, to God's work from the beginning of the world to show us how Jesus is God's continued faithfulness for all people. Jesus is exactly what humanity needed and came at a time when humanity needed him. And all four Gospels, they lead up together to where Jesus is crucified as a criminal and then raised from the dead to show us that Jesus is the new dawn for all humanity. That Jesus is the good news for you and for me. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to encourage you to go read one of those four Gospels and see if you can uncover their secrets. Thanks so much for being here today. If you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, I want to invite you to share and subscribe. And if you're watching us on cable access, I'm honored that you're here. Come join us tomorrow.